Now, 153 Tamil asylum seekers were believed to be in the process of being returned to Sri Lanka by Australian authorities took a twist last night when the High Court stepped in and issued an injunction against them being handed over, presumably to the Sri Lankan Navy, until the court can assess what an application to permanently halt the government's actions about. We have on the line Professor Dawn Rothwell, Professor of International Law at ANU College of Law. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Good morning.
Now, what's the story here? What's going to happen?
Well, look, the High Court's orders last night are on a very interim basis, and further legal argument will be made before Justice Crennan in the High Court today to determine whether those stay orders should be permanently issued.
So what's the connection between these Sri Lankan asylum seekers and Australian law? Where's the jurisdiction of our High Court to say what should happen to 153 people on an asylum boat that hasn't even reached Australia?
Well, look, it's a good question, and it's a factual question that the High Court will ask for clarification, because other than a lot of speculation and a brief observation made by Minister Morrison yesterday, it's not very clear as to exactly where this boat is and who may be exercising control over it. But if the Australian government, via the Navy or customs officials, are exercising control over the vessel, well then Australian law will be directly activated in that instance.
And who's initiated this action, Professor? Is it these aspiring asylum seekers or someone else?
My understanding is that it's Shine Lawyers, which is a law firm based in Sydney, which has a significant interest in advocacy for asylum seekers and refugees.
So is it, reading with the way that this has been put together, does that mean now that to be an asylum seeker, it really does not mean that you have a chance to come to a country like ours and we can just turn you back so easily? So is there no sense for any asylum seeker seeking asylum in Australia?
Well, the position of the government, as I understand it, is that, of course, Australia does have a refugee resettlement policy, but those persons need to make applications to be resettled in Australia from outside of Australia rather than coming directly to Australia. And if those persons do reach the Australian mainland or close to the Australian mainland, in the past we know, of course, those persons have been taken to Manus Island in Nauru for offshore resettlement.
Is there an international law that binds Australia by treaty or otherwise that can override the policy of the Abbott government in this respect?
No, there's no international law that can override the policy of the government and have a direct adjustment of Australian law, so to speak. But Australia needs to conduct itself consistently with international law, and of course much of the debate about asylum seekers is framed around the provisions of the Refugee Convention. So yesterday, when the Minister announced that a smaller boatload of asylum seekers had been directly returned to Sri Lanka, many persons, including myself, were raising concerns as to whether that was a direct violation of the Refugee Convention and therefore inconsistent with Australia's obligations under international law.
Just on the other side of John's question there, is there a chance in that the government can ignore the High Court order and go ahead with its own actions and not follow what the High Court directs?
No, the High Court will certainly bind the Government of Australia, and that's consistent with our separation of powers and, of course, the Constitution. Subject to how the High Court may hand down its orders, it's certainly within the purview of the government to seek to adjust any relevant provisions of Australian law which may be found to be deficient. But that, of course, would require a parliamentary process to amend or modify Commonwealth law to that effect.
We see lots of news items about refugees in Europe going from, say, Albania and various other trouble spots into Italy. Is Australia unique in the sense that it's sending these refugees back where they came from?
No, Australia is not necessarily unique in that sense, and certainly Italy in particular has adopted a bit of a pushback policy similar to aspects of Australia's Operation Sovereign Borders. But the incident that Minister Morrison revealed yesterday, where Australia had directly returned by boat Sri Lankan asylum seekers to the Sri Lankan Navy, is, in my understanding, quite a unique example of a country directly returning persons to another military and to directly return persons to a place from which they've fled, therefore directly raising questions as to whether or not Australia's actions are consistent with the Refugee Convention.
Professor, thank you very much for your time. That was Professor Don Rothwell, Professor of International Law at ANU College of Law.